Okay, good morning, everyone. Let's get started. Let's see here. Share you my screen. Hi, everybody. I hope you had a nice weekend. Let's get started. What we were talking about in Sif Yud Aleph of the Imrei Yaakov is the halacha that in the event that I use a proxy to do business, then sometimes the proxy is entitled to the fringe benefits of the exchange or the transactions that I sent him to do. But in general, the proxy is not allowed to keep the full amount of the fringe benefit that he acquires, because the view is that whatever benefit that he acquires, it's a suffix whether the acquisition of that benefit was meant for his employer or his dispatcher, or was meant for him. And therefore, in a situation where it's perceived to be a gift that the employee or the proxy acquires on behalf of his company, so then the proper standard is that the proxy or the employee splits the difference or splits the value of the gift. If it's not indicated that it's a gift, but rather he's able to get a really good deal on behalf of his employer or on behalf of his dispatcher, so then everything has to be delivered to the employer or the dispatcher. Okay, that was the distinction that we drew. But ultimately, since he's receiving this proxy, or this employee is receiving benefits because of the person who dispatched him, we therefore say that he can't keep it himself. He's either got to split it or deliver all of it to the person who sent him to do this business. I want to take a look at the Likutim today, and then maybe take a look at another sefer outside. So let's take a look at the Likutim, which brings us real life cases. And let's see. There's a case history as follows: Umachar biyoker, that if the shaliach, if the proxy succeeds in selling the item for more than what the dispatcher was expecting him to sell it for, and he's therefore able to fetch a higher price, he has to give all of that money to the mishaleach, to the dispatcher. Now, im shiker hashaliach, uba va'omar lemocher sheploni rotze lases lach kach v'kach ba'ad hachefetz, v'tziva lo lemachro kach, ve'achar kach nisbar shelo kach yoser, hamoser shayach lamishaleach. If, let's say, the proxy lied, in other words, he was using whatever guile he had to be able to convince he said here we're talking about where he's buying something from a seller, and the dispatcher gave him money to make a purchase, and he lies to the seller. He says to the seller that my dispatcher, the person that I represent, wishes to. One second. Rotze lasetz l'chakach v'kach ba'ad hachefetz, v'tziva lo l'mochro kach. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's the shaliach lied to his dispatcher. Excuse me. He says to his dispatcher that there's a third party that would like to buy the object from you, and he's only willing to pay $90. And then it turns out that the shaliach sold it for $100 and pocketed 10 of the dollars himself.
So he's trying to skim off something for himself.
He's trying to skim off some for himself. So here he quotes from a sefer from the Chavas Das, that in that situation he can collect the money from the mishaleach. he's allowed to legally extract that money because the shaliach misrepresented the facts. Next case is shaliach shel mostos Torah. So let's just think about it. Here's a guy who was trying to be enterprising and industrious, and he says, "I think I can sell it for $90, and I was only able to find someone who's willing to pay $90 for it." This could happen even in real estate transactions where someone says, "I was only able to find someone who's willing to pay X for your house." And it turns out that he was able to do a side deal with the buyer and was willing to get him to pay more, but he doesn't disclose that to the seller. So halachically, the seller has legal recourse if it's discovered afterwards that the shaliach pocketed the money. He says v'tzarich iyun. He says it really requires further analysis of that. I'm not sure why he says it requires further analysis, but it certainly seems reasonable that there should be some kind of legal recourse for the seller, because after all, the buyer paid extra money for the purchase. He didn't pay extra money because the shaliach was giving him anything of value.
I'm wondering, Rabbi, whether the further analysis is not just to recoup the amount of money that's the difference, but it's effectively fraud, misrepresentation. I mean, there may be other recourse against him for trying to pull the stunt. It might be even beyond just getting back what was missing.
Right. So there's no that you're talking about some kind of penalty. So there's no penalty for that kind of misrepresentation, for that kind of fraud here in the halacha. Usually you don't find such penalties unless the guy regularly does it. Sometimes a beis din at their discretion could fine someone some kind of extra halachic fine, but it's not within the purview of the halacha over here.
I see.
Next case, shaliach shel mostos Torah hanikra shadar. So you have someone who is a meshulach on behalf of a yeshiva, whose job is to go and do fundraising, and this still exists to this day, where they basically pay him or tell him that a certain percentage of what he raises he's allowed to keep. We know that this goes on, and we know that this is perfectly legitimate, is that they have to pay their fundraiser a certain amount of money per year in order to sustain him. Sometimes they'll tell him that you can keep a third of whatever money you raise for the yeshiva, you get to keep for yourself. And that's a business model. Or sometimes they'll tell him even 50%. Whatever you raise for the yeshiva, half of it you can keep for your parnasa, and the other half you give to the yeshiva. Is there anything dishonest about this? It depends on what the percentages are. At some point, if a guy is going out collecting for the Panovich yeshiva, the Mir yeshiva, and he gets to keep 90% and the yeshiva only gets 10%, then at some point it becomes misrepresentation, right? What exactly that percentage is unclear, but I've seen it sometimes up to 50%, and sometimes it's disturbing, sometimes it's not disturbing, sometimes it's understandable. Anyway, this is the type of business operation that is set up, that is described here in this tshuva. Yesh shekosvu denogim roshe hamostos lahasnos imo shekol hanesinos sheyitnu lo af sheyomer lo beferish shehin lo levado mikol makom chayiv litain chetzi lamostos. So many times the yeshiva will set up the following arrangement. Whatever you collect when you go, let's say you're an Israeli and you're going to Chutz La'aretz to collect from different Jewish communities to fundraise, they say to him that even if the donor says to you, I'm giving you a separate check just for you, my dear fundraiser, because you have found favor in my eyes, okay? But nonetheless, the fundraiser still has an obligation to give whatever he's got to give still half of whatever he raises, even if someone tells him it's explicitly that this is a private gift for you, he still has to give half of it to the mostas. And he quotes from a sefer, Sheherich be'inyan hatanoim sheragilam lahasnusim hashadar uvi inyan scharo. And he says there's a special sefer Eretz Chaim that goes into all of these details about how to deal with such a fundraiser and what conditions are necessary. There was I looked up one of these tshuvas from a sefer called Mate Yosef that he quotes on the bottom. And the question that was posed in that particular sefer was as follows. What happens if the fundraiser, while he's going to fundraise for the yeshiva, is also doing a side enterprise? Let's say, for example, he takes Sfarim with him that he himself has written and he wants to sell those Sfarim. So the yeshiva claims that whatever profits you get from the sale of your Sfarim, you have to give half to us, just like you give half of your fundraising efforts to us, because the only way you got into the door to see this benefactor was because you told him you represented Yeshiva X. And then while you were there, you told him that, by the way, would you like to buy one of my Sfarim? And so as a result, the yeshivas claim that we're entitled to half of those proceeds is a valid claim. And this was, you can imagine this happening because you've all been involved with fundraisers of some kind, is that it's a tough business. And it's very, very difficult to maneuver how much exactly the individual is entitled to and how much the Mossad, the yeshiva or the religious institution that he represents, how much they are entitled to collect. But clearly you understand that this is a traditional setup for fundraising. It's not just that they get a fixed salary, but they work on commission, as you understand. And many times it's that they get up to half of whatever they fundraise and they keep for themselves. Which is, why if you tell them, if you tell the fundraiser, give me an envelope and I'll send it directly to the yeshiva, they may balk at that because, or I don't know, depending upon how it's arranged. Anyway, that's just an interesting halachic shaila. I wanted to show you another issue that comes up that's under the rubric of this halacha about what to do in a situation where the shaliach is able. We had said that even if the shaliach, through his own industriousness, his own ability to negotiate, is able to get the employer or the dispatcher a better deal, nonetheless, if it's clear that the deal is attained as a business transaction and not as a gift, he has to deliver all of the profits to the employer or the dispatcher. So just to show you something, I just wanted to show you something from that I found in a sefer called Refidato Zahav, which is a book on the laws of ribis, on the laws of charging interest on loans. But in the course of that discussion, he has the following shaila. He says, Nishalti b'mi shesholach shaliach lahachlif check Amerikoi ad 2%. I was asked the following shaila. He says a guy receives an American check for, let's say, $100. Just let's keep it simple. Normally, when you go to a bank or a money changer to cash in an American check, at least in the convention when this sefer was written, maybe 20, 30 years ago, the convention was the bank or the money changer took a 2% commission on top of the check. So you would only get $98 worth of shekels at the proper exchange rate, okay? So v'hashaliach matzah chalfan ba'ad chatzi achuz. And the shaliach was able to find a guy who was able to do it only for a 0.5% commission. So he was able to get $99.50 worth of shekels instead of $98 worth of shekels. Ulafi hanal, based on what we've been learning up until now, says the Sefer, the asr l'shaliach likach achuz v'chetzi hanisharim da'arevach shayach lebal hamaos. He says it is not permitted for the shaliach to pocket that extra 1.5% for himself. He has an obligation to deliver all of the money that he's cashed for his friend or for his dispatcher. He's got to give him the entire amount, unless, I guess, he stipulates. Unless he stipulates explicitly. He just, if a guy sends his friend and says, "Here, can you do me a favor? You're going." Here we're talking about an informal arrangement. There's a guy in yeshiva got a check from his family in America. His friend says, "I'm going to the makolet. Do you need anything?" And he says, "Well, right next door to the makolet is a money changer. Do you mind bringing me back a check?" And the guy thinks to himself, he says he'll be industrious. So he has a friend who's willing to do the exchange for 0.5% instead of 2%. So instead of taking it to the money changer, he switches the money. He gives the check to his friend instead. He says the guy's not allowed to pocket that 1.5% of the $1.50. He says, "V'hagam de b'shulchan aruch harav b'choshen Mishpat Hilchos mechira sif yud aleph kosef de bedavar sheyeh shar katzuv rak chetzia lahamishaleach uve'ein shar katzuv hakol mishaleach." He says, I will grant you. In the Rav Shulchan Aruch, in what we're studying now, he writes that when there's a fixed amount, like if there's like everyone knows there's a 2% commission, right? Then we say that the mishaleach only gets half of what the shaliach was able to get. So you could argue, based on what we're learning now, that the shaliach should get a half of that $1.50. They should split the $1.50 50-50, because here it's clear that every money changer, there's a standard 2% charge, and this guy's willing to do it for 0.5%. It's only when there's no fixed market do we say that everything goes to the dispatcher. Biyadua demaran bal shevet halevi posek de klape yatsa hashar b'sa mikra dollar yatsa hashar. And apparently you could say that over here too, we're dealing with a fixed market of 2%. And if it's a fixed market and the guy's able to get 0.5% instead of 2% as far as a commission, why wouldn't we say that the shaliach gets to keep at least half? So amnam, so he says, but I would rather argue as follows. He says, Yeshlomer dibin yanenu shiny. It's different over here. Echa de b'shut shevet halevi kasev is erak l'snif. Avol mitzarv sham od kamatomim laheter dekan zelosha. So first of all, he says, the sefer that you're quoting from to justify letting the shaliach keep half of the saved commission is using multiple arguments, and therefore you can't just use this one argument alone. But the second argument is what is relevant to us. But you're comparing apples and oranges. The halacha that the Rav Shulchan Aruch is talking about is not analogous to the scenario that we've just presented, and then he quotes the Rav Shulchan Aruch, and he says that it's only when it's clear that the third party is giving a gift. If he's giving a gift to the shaliach, so then we say that gift has to be split 50-50 between the dispatcher and the shaliach. So he writes, after quoting the language, he says, "Umuchach derak ba'ofen de bederach klal mocher ze nosein ba'ad sikum kesef kazeh rak kach v'kach v'kan hosif memela yesh sadlomer de kavanasa l'shaliach." It's only when the third party that the shaliach goes to normally gives everyone else X amount of dollars, and he gives this shaliach because he likes him X plus. Okay? Then it's clear that he's doing this as a favor to the shaliach, and as such, the shaliach is entitled to half of the proceeds of that gift. Aval benidon didan de machlif ze machlif lechol echad ba'ad chatzi achuz leka raya de kavanas hamocher l'shaliach de ulayla mishalech gamkin haya machlif kach. But he says in our scenario, where this shaliach, the guy who was sent to cash in the American check, was able to find a guy who only charges a 0.5% commission instead of a 2% commission. He says that guy gives charges a 0.5% commission to everybody. He's not doing a special favor to this particular guy who's the shaliach. Ulefizeh ba'ofen derak ba'ad hashaliach machlif kol kach bezol ulai havishaper dino kemo shekasav harav bedavar sheshar katzav dechatzir rashayach l'shaliach. He says, in a scenario where the money changer is willing to do only a special favor for this particular shaliach because they're friends, and he gives him a discount because you're my friend, so then you could argue that the shaliach is entitled to half of that discounted commission. But if this money changer is a guy who changes money for everybody for a 0.5% commission, and he undercuts the banks because he figures that that's his business model, so then the shaliach is not entitled to any of the discounted commission difference, right? So you have to look at, and that's true, by the way, even if the guy who dispatched him or the employer who sent him wasn't expecting him to go to a discounting person. But if he's able to find someone who's able to do a discount, he has to return all of the proceeds to his employer or to the guy who dispatched him. And that's an important halacha. In other words, and especially you have this in employer-employee situations all the time. The employer is expecting the employee to procure an item for X amount of dollars, and the employee is able to be industrious and is able to get a much better price. So then he's got to deliver all of that to his employer. He's not allowed to pocket any of it himself. And that's standard procedure in many industries. It could be that he can ask his boss for a bonus because he says to him that, look how much money I've saved for the company. And for you personally, don't you think I'm entitled to a raise or to a bonus at the end of the year? But he doesn't have a halachic right to the added proceeds. Okay, questions, comments?
This is traditionally black market stuff.
Well,
I think the anti-money laundering people would have an issue with this.
So it's an interesting question, Izzy. Is this particular sefer talking about black market activity? I don't see that necessarily indicated for sure. Is it? I don't know. But, when you and I were in yeshiva, umpteen years ago, there were black market traders. Today, it's much less prevalent to find black market traders in Israel because the shekel is so strong, and there have been sort of standards. It's not the Wild West in Israel as it used to be. In other words, back in the 80s or the 70s and 80s, when people would go to Israel with American dollars, it was the Wild West. It was like the gold rush, and you would find the banks charging exorbitant fees because they were socialized banks who didn't care about making money, and you had industrious people who would buy appliances from you that you brought from the U.S., and they would cash your American dollars and give you much better rates. It's not that way anymore. But here it's not clear to me that that's what we're talking about in this sefer. It could be, in which case there's a separate halachic shaila, which is, at what point is it legal to go to a private money changer if in the Israeli law it states that you're not allowed to change money unless you go to a bank. At that time in the 80s, when I was in yeshiva in the early 80s, I can tell you that it was standard practice for yeshiva bachrim to change money with black market changers, and the government turned a blind eye. In other words, there was no, it was, like I said, it was a bit more of the Wild West back then. where everyone did what they wanted to do, and the government really understood that it was ridiculous what the banks were charging, and no one in their right mind was going to go to the bank, and so they sort of turned a blind eye to it, even though technically it was in the books that you weren't supposed to do that. I don't know what to tell you based on.
I went to back then when I went to Purim, I went to Israel for a visit. So I went to the bank to exchange some American money. Person sitting at the desk. So I stood. I went up to the person. She said to me, "Go see that guy over there standing in the corner. Go to him. He'll give you a better rate." That's what I did.
So there you have it. It's a different world today.
Yeah.
Thank God Israel's in a much better place and the laws are in place. So anyway, I'm gonna stop early today because of Rosh Chodesh. I remind you all to say Ya'aleh V'Yavo and Hallel and Musaf in your davening. And I hope you have a great day and a good Chodesh. Okay, everyone?
Chodesh Tov, everyone. Be well.
Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh Tov.